The main thing which is holding back a mass step up in innovation in early drug discovery, which it would be propagated by the use of AI and data, is a supply chain problem. Because if you take it as a supply chain problem, you've got points in the supply chain which have connectors. And I call these connectors pipes, like plumbing pipes. And these pipes are blocked. Where a data scientist should be helping a wet lab person, it ain't happening today. You think, oh, it is happening. Well, actually, you look carefully, it's not happening. The reason is because the consumer, the user, the wet lab person, scientist, biologist, or chemist, is basically looking at these topics and saying, this is cool, we should do something. I'll let the other guy do it first. And the problem with letting the other guy do it first is by the time the other guy gets it right, you're 5 years behind and your company's going to fail.
Hey, everybody. This week, I'm joined by Dr. Raminderpal Singh, champions the hitchhikerSAI.org community, and that's all about drug discovery. We'll talk about that later. But has 30 years plus, I should say, experience in the US and Europe, initially in the semiconductor industry, then with IBM research in the healthcare industry. Leads a community of 100 plus scientists and data scientists in the hitchhikerSAI community. He's the CEO of Incubate Bio and has a passion to accelerate innovation in drug discovery using effective computational techniques so that new treatments can be given to patients faster and cheaper. Raminderpal, welcome to the Healthtech Podcast. How are you doing, sir?
Not bad. Nice midweek conversation. Very much enjoying the opportunity. Thanks for the invite.
You're very welcome. You are based in Leicester, I believe, and you're wearing Leicester FC colours. I did wonder if it's a Leicester FC shirt. It's not. It's what is it? A merch shirt? Incubate Bio. Nice. Very nice.
That's right. So I learned the hard way. When you go to the booths, you have to wear some sort of label on your back and on your chest. And nobody pays attention.
Absolutely,
mate. Don't worry.
Very nice. Enjoying Leicester. I've got a few friends up in Leicester, actually. Going there in not too long, actually, for a wedding in the summer. But yeah, how's Leicester treating you?
I'm in a nice part. I'm by Victoria Park, so I'm in the nice part, which is fairly reasonable, very multicultural. You can walk everywhere, park the car, don't drive anywhere.
Very nice. So listen, Raminderpal, you've obviously got a very interesting background. Health tech, biotech, IBM, big company, small company, startups, corporates. You've sort of got the lot. CEO, other things on the way up there. I've had a look at your background and it looks fascinating. So I'm looking forward to this bit. It'd be great for me and our listeners if you could tell us a bit about your story.
Yeah, absolutely. So started as a semiconductor engineer and actually electrical engineer in London, Imperial College. Left as an engineer, became a VC actually with a company called 3i. At the time they were regional. They were owned by 6 banks and then they became public. And I worked in Leeds for a year. And I looked around the office and I looked at these folks and I thought, what do they do when they're finished doing their VC thing? And they all became CFOs of small local companies. And I thought, I don't really want to do that. I just did an engineering degree. So I said, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore. So after a year, I left that. And then I went and started a PhD. I found my way also a PhD program, a lot of luck there in Newcastle. So I went to Newcastle, spent 3 years, well, actually spent 5 years because I'm quite lazy. And so 5 years doing PhD. Well, you'd think that I was quite sharp, but actually for the first 2 or 3 years, I was really just not doing much. But until that's my supervisor, he thought I was golden.
It's also very fun in Newcastle. It's a very fun city to be around. So engineering it to be there for an extra couple of years is certainly not a bad thing.
Yeah, I wouldn't say engineered it. I would say that I was just sloppy and clumsy. And then I woke up after 3 years. And then I decided, okay, if I don't do this, then I'll have to go on the dole. And in those days, they used to pay the dole. This is like the mid-90s. But they were squeezing and getting unemployment benefit was getting harder. So I thought, okay, better finish the PhD. So I came up with a topic which no one was tackling. And the other thing I realized about PhD, which is very interesting in those days, do something greenfield. do something that nobody's done before, and then you can just do something really cheap and nasty, and they'll give you the piece of paper. If you do something that somebody else has already done before, then you have to climb mountains before they'll acknowledge you. So I went to this field called substrate modeling, which was really cool at the time. You have a design, you have these semiconductors, and they've got these depth in them. They're 3D objects, and when you run things really fast, they create electrical current noise in those silicon, in the silicon 3D base. And if you can model that noise, then you can see how that noise is affecting other parts of the circuit. And it was really kind of cool and fancy. But actually, if you look at my code, and I'm very embarrassed about my code, very embarrassed. My PhD supervisor told me, this is the most embarrassing thing. He forced me to put my code in my thesis at the back. Now, the thesis is what I'm proud of. The code is really clumsy. So what happens is that you've got a book, which I still have somewhere. It's in 1997. I've still got it. And it's bound, and you have to pay 100 quid to have this thing bound. And it's got this lovely section about how you solve, sliced bread. And then it's got 50 pages of really bad code in it, literally printed out line by line. So then I did the PhD, and it was a time in England where if you had a PhD, you were paid less than if you had a bachelor's. It was that time where you'd go around and say, "I got a PhD," and people would say, "No, I don't think so." So I went around looking for a job, and I remember going to Slough, west side of London. There was Fujitsu ICL doing some chip design stuff, and I turned up and said, "Look, I got this PhD." They said, "This is pretty cool. I think you can help us. Go talk to our HR person. Second round interview. Go talk to the HR person in Manchester." Now, this is the first clue about never living in Manchester. So I went to talk to the HR person. The HR person gave me a half an hour lecture about how somebody had come in a week before, said they had a master's, asked for some more money because they had a master's, and he just threw them out. And then he asked me, "So what do you want?" And I said, "I've got a PhD, so I want some more." So he threw me out. Eventually, I found a job in the UK, in Stevenage, GC Plessy. And then I went through the MOD security covers on that because it was some Verilog programming, some weird programming stuff. But in the meanwhile, some folks in California had found out that I was doing this work. And the guy, this is how luck works. I mean, it's all about luck. My whole story is luck, or luck and unluck. Some guys in a company called Cadence Design Systems in San Jose had found out that I was doing this work. I'd sent them over my CV a few months earlier. They said, "No, we don't have a place." But the guy who was managing it left. So they rang me up. So while I'm getting clearance for GC Plessy, they rang me up and said, "Look, you still available?" I said, "Well, are you kidding me? Go live in Stevenage or go live in San Jose." Literally. So they flew me over for interview. I spent 2 or 3 days bluffing that I knew how to code. I understood substrate modeling. They bought the bluff because they were desperate to hire somebody. And then I was hired, and I took my wife, 2 kids. We all moved over. That's my beginning of my life in San Jose in the US. I spent 3 years, just enough to get my green card and leave. That was the tendency at the time. Wait long enough to get your sponsored green card, get your green card and leave. And then I'm sitting here at Cadence, and there's a wonderful set of very highly skilled people, very high skills. And they're programming C++, and they're doing this and doing that, and they're programming these complex design tools, which are allowing them to do all sorts of weird modeling. And I'm looking around, and then an email comes out. I remember this email. Anybody wants to sign up to learn circuit theory? And these people were signed up to learn circuit theory. I want you to think about it. These people were producing the most complex software in the world for circuit design. And they're signing up to go on Circuit 101 training. So yes, that's the point. There's a gap in that, the logic. And I realized that I was surrounded by a bunch of computer science people who were really smart. Mathematics were pretty good as well, but they knew nothing about circuit theory. They knew nothing about the topic they were there to enable. So I said, right, now we're going to leave that. So then I got a job on the East Coast. I'm going from the West Coast to the East Coast with IBM in the IBM Semiconductors group in Vermont. Vermont's next to, for folks who are listening, Vermont's a beautiful state in the US, very liberal, very wonderful, very welcoming, and not that expensive. Next to Massachusetts, New Hampshire that type of area. And I stayed there in Burlington, which is a bit of a bubble area. Lots of people who are kind of coming in from outside the state live in Burlington. They don't call that Little Vermont. and I worked for IBM, the semiconductors guys. And that was fantastic. I mean, I was learning every day. I was a manager, then a second line manager, this and that. And I was learning every day from really brilliant people. I mean, really people who are so dedicated. There used to be a time that IBM was a job for life. In fact, people would introduce themselves as IBM managers, and their dads retired at IBM, and then their grandfathers had retired at IBM.
Wow.
And then all that, but what's coincidence is that when I joined, all that stopped. Within 2 years of me joining, they started sacking people because they just had a bad business model, and it began in about 2003, 2004, and they started sacking people, and they've been sacking people until today. IBM was a wonderful journey for me. I was there in semiconductors. I'd written a book in California while I was at Cadence, where it was an edited book. A bunch of papers put together and put my name on it. Then I wrote another book in Vermont with two really brilliant people on silicon germanium, which is a form of semiconductor technology. All that was really fantastic. I was part of a semiconductor standards body called VSIA, I'm vice president of that group. Really enjoyed that influence. In fact, in 2003, I was nominated. I started doing a weekly. This is a really cool trick. I do a weekly column for a magazine called EE Times, which had a very broad, still does a very broad readership. And in 2003, they nominated me as one of the top 13 influencers in the semiconductor industry. So I was really, riding the wave. And then I realized that wave was going nowhere because all the technology was moving to Taiwan. So right. You look 5 years forward and you say, okay, I love this. I'm going to enjoy this, but how long's my job going to be? How long is it really going to be here? Because semiconductors is complex. It's getting more complex. It's getting more expensive. How many players are there really going to be? Unlike the health tech industry, or especially unlike the biotech industry, semiconductors had segregated. So you have fabless design, people at home who use machine design. You have people building semiconductor technologies and building chips, and they're all separate parts of the supply chain. The biotech industry is a bit more integrated, and one of the problems with the biotech industry is that it's too integrated. So then I got out there. I went into market segment analysis within IBM. I used the big company environment to move jobs within. So there's a thing about quadrants. If you're moving from one type of job to another type of job, you need to have experience to move to that new quadrant. How do you get experience if you haven't got the job? Well, in a big company, You can do that. You can do that. You can say, well, it's an internal move. So big companies are much more likely to do internal moves than they are to do external hires. External hires are expensive and require large permissions. Internal moves don't. And the reason for that is because if you think about the auditing, they've got the same number of people on the books. So it's not costing the company anymore, just moving people around. But if you have to bring somebody in, then you have to add cost to the company. So I got a job as a market analyst for the semiconductor industry I was in New York at the time. And that was good because now I'm exposing myself to a completely different type of job. I'm writing market reports, market research reports. I'm working very closely with Gartner, et cetera, but it's still IBM. And then from there, I moved into the IP industry, the IP outsourcing industry, out licensing industry, things called TLAs, JDAs, joint development agreements, technology license agreements. And I managed to get very close to IBM Research. And then I joined IBM Research in doing that. And the beautiful thing is that IBM Research is the largest for-profit research group in the world, I believe, for-profit. And so you're seeing people under a lot of pressure to come up with, and there was a handful of Nobel Prize winners there. But wow. you've got this great environment, and this is what it's all about. It's about putting yourself in the right environment, because not only are you learning, but you're also being able to spin hard. If you're contributing, X today, you can contribute X plus 2, X plus 10, or 5X or 10X over a period of time, because they're continuously looking for. They've got a lot of goodies to sell, a lot of goodies to monetize, and they're looking for people who are creative. And you need, if you're instinctively good at this stuff, then you can take advantage of the environment you're in. But if you don't have a good environment, then you're fighting uphill. And so I worked in Yorktown, IBM Research in Yorktown, New York. and I worked on Watson to genomics through that, which was absolutely fantastic. I'm very thankful to my colleagues and also to the vice president, the senior vice president there, John Kelly, who's since retired, for supporting that project. Come about 2000 and there was big announcements though with New York Genome. So I did some big deals. I mean, I'm doing like $20 million deals here. Of course, I'm not really doing any work. It's the engine which is doing the work, and I happen to be the point for that engine. But you have lawyers everywhere, you have very smart research leads everywhere, and you have executives, and everybody's gunning for, we need to do the deal. So the deal's sort of positioned, and now it's an execution of subtle contracts language and making sure that teams are aligned. But that was fantastic. That's big company working very well. I don't often say about IBM, by the way. So then it's about 2015, I realized that had also seen the cycle. That was also seen its time. My contribution in that world had peaked. And the first thing, what I'd mentioned before, for example, when I was Cadence, I was a 3i, then a Cadence, then in Burlington, Vermont, was when I see these peaks, I realize I have to go, because sooner or later someone's going to shove me out. So I decided now's time to go. And about that time, I also felt that it was an important time to come back home to England, UK, when my parents are growing older, when my wife's parents are growing older, and you've got to establish for the future. And the US is a wonderful place. We lived in democratic bubbles, East Coast, West Coast. But you don't want to be growing old and having the greatest time of your life or living well and not seeing your parents through their last 10, 20 years. That's just not where I wanted to be. So we came back to UK, and thankfully I got a great job at Eagle Genomics. Now this time I'm going from business development and out licensing and complex stuff like that to purebred SaaS sales. So now I'm a pure sales. And the first thing I learned is the business development sales are not the same. They're completely different things. Now, I was shocked. Sales guys are like, this is like a complete mindset. And it took me about a year to get that mindset cleared up. And I was lucky that there were some really good people at Eagle Genomics who are very good salespeople who, really nudged me, kicked me, coached me very fast into being a sales guy. So I became this hunter. I became this lone wolf. So I moved from the US to the UK to work for Cambridge. So I worked in Cambridge for Eagle Genomics. And then I spent all my time in the US selling stuff. So I'd be on a plane to the US, and it was fantastic. I'd be going East Coast, Midwest, West Coast, and I'd be at large corporations, mid-sized corporations, talking to even some academics, just trying to push technology. And I learned the whole notion of the buyer's journey. I learned the notion of challenges sale. I learned the difference between a hunter and the other types of sales techniques there are out there. I learned my instinctive place in life as a sales guy. And I managed to do, a small handful of really decent deals. And there I didn't have the support. There's just me. I'm the lone wolf. I'm out there trying to close deals. I'm out there trying to get negotiations across the line. Don't get me wrong. There's a CFO back there who's very experienced back at Eagle. But above that, it's really just me and, go close the deal or there's no deal closed. And that was really, from an experience point of view, that was beautiful. It's like walking through a coal of fire. You can learn how to, there are certain people who can walk through fire. They can walk on the coals. And that's what I had to learn to do. And then I left that job after about 3 or 4 years. Again, that sort of time, I did a lot of work on the microbiome industry. I learned the difference between regulatory and non-regulatory businesses. So if you sell into a biotech or a pharma in a regulatory space, you've got a different type of sales process, different type of challenges. And as opposed to selling to what's called a CPG, consumer product goods industry, FMCG, I think, or fast-moving consumer goods sales. Yeah, and you learn that. This massive difference in the sales process. It's a massive difference in the hills to climb, and that was really fantastic. Got out of that 2018, did a couple of years of consulting, 2 or 3 very good projects. LifeQ, for example, who are in the US, big R&D team down in South Africa. Fantastic work there. And while doing that consulting work for LifeQ, which is a health tech company, they do biostats on watches. Many of the watches the listeners are probably wearing. And I got very close to one of the founders there, Rian, and one of the senior vice presidents, Dylan. And a year after that, they phoned me up and said, look, we're sort of operationally left LifeQ, and we're wondering if you want to set up a startup. So, okay. I mean, why not? By the way, for the listeners, you don't need to be as impromptu as that. You can think about it, but I tend not to. So we started Incubate Bio. Wow, that's been a journey. It's hired the people in Cape Town, actually, raised some money, thanks to my co-founders there, raised some money. But I've realized that the people in Cape Town are very cost effective and very honest. Honesty matters. One of the biggest problems I've found in looking around at startups and their hiring patterns, whether they're hiring locally in London or hiring salespeople in the US, or in my case, hiring a research team in Cape Town area, is honesty is actually, you can't take it for granted. Everybody says they're honest, 50% of them aren't. Now, I don't mean they're lying, but there's a lot of ego and there's a lot of dressing up, and you end up paying 6 months to a year of your company's time because you've picked up somebody who's got a great CV, probably great for the job, but actually you just missed each other at night. You shouldn't have been hired. Shouldn't have been hired. But because you're in a rush, because they've got a great CV, because they come from a great uni, you're hosed, really. You have to hire them, and you shouldn't have hired them. Be very, very... There was a guy in London who once told me years ago, he said, a good CEO knows how to fire people. They fire fast. Mm. I am not so sure. I actually like to hang on to my people, but I would say that a good CEO is very cautious about hiring. Mm. They learn rules, they follow rules. You need to be fast. You need to pick up people like in a heartbeat, but you need to develop a wonderful instinct, an objective, brutal instinct that this person will work, this person won't work. And you need to allow your instinct to operate, because hiring can be sometimes a very fast process. You can't wait around, otherwise they'll go. But you can't just jump on top of things like, you can't be a lemming in this process. Mm. So we did that, and that Incubate Bio has been a really great. Please, for the audience, please go to the website Incubate.bio, really good operation. And recently, in parallel to that, I've realized through the Incubate Bio work and previous work I did at Watson, through the Watson Genomics work, that there's this massive gap out there in terms of huge amounts of biotechs are wet lab based, and they haven't changed their processes for the last 30 years. I mean, literally, for the last 30 years, they haven't changed. In fact, one could argue that they're using data less aggressively than they did 20, 30 years ago, because now you've got all these computer scientists telling them to use their Python libraries, and the scientists themselves are actually saying, well, what do you want me to do? But 20, 30 years ago, they were using Excel files, they were using R themselves, and that's all being separated out of skills. And so now you've got a real problem in terms of scientists being enabled, wet lab scientists being enabled, whether they're biologists or chemists. And I wanted to go after this. So I created this Hitchhikers thing, and I talked to bunches of characters. Hitchhikersai.org, that's the website. And wow, is that fun. Massively fun. And that's my journey.
It's incredible, man. And we'll talk more about Hitchhikers and what you're trying to do. I want to take you back to something that you said. Actually, you talked about it when you were in the VC job and thinking about what to do next. You talked about looking forwards at where does this take me. You also talked about it when you talked about the semiconductor industry, and you were looking at it and you were going, like, what does this industry look like later, and where's my place in it? It's interesting because you talked about luck. You talked about your journey being a lot of luck, and I think you to a point you create your own luck, right? Like not everything is lucky. What is it? The golfing quote: the more I practice, the luckier I get. I think some of this is by design. You seem to have an ability to analyze a space. You can exist in a space for a while. You have the self-awareness to find your place in it. And then you're able to look forwards and go, like, what does this industry look like, and that where do I fit in? And there's been a couple of times where you've changed tack completely here, which is a risky thing to do, or seemingly risky thing to do. unless you've done the analysis that I think you have, in which case you've utterly de-risked it, because really you're going to somewhere that fits you better. And I think that's a really interesting point about careers, because I think, a lot of people say this to me sometimes, like, oh, you were so bold in that move. Like, there was so much risk. Like, I've never seen it that way, because I guess I've actually gone, well, staying here is actually more risky for me for all these other reasons. And actually, I think a part of you has to be selfish in your career, and a part of you has to look after number one. And it seems like that's what you've done quite well. I really like the fact that you've got this ability to look forwards in your career and look at an industry and go, where's my place in it? I think that's a really nice way that you kind of phrased it there. So I guess I'd put the question back to you, which is, how much of this do you really think is luck, and how much do you think that is design, and how important is it for people that are earlier in their careers in health tech, in biotech, fast moving, innovative industries? How important is it that they actually do what you did there and look forwards and question what their role might be, whether their role might actually exist? And crucially, like, am I going somewhere that makes me happy? Like, how important do you think that is? Or do you think it is complete luck?
So first of all, in your comment about luck, there's a professor, I don't think he's alive now, he's at Harvard, called Clayton Christensen. And he wrote a book called Competing Against Luck. So that's the novel, that's the Bible on this topic.
Right.
A great book for the audience, Competing Against Luck. So you're actually talking about, and you create environments where you've got a lot of tailwind. And if you jump into environments with a lot of tailwind, it may look like luck, but you've jumped into an environment where luck is on your side. That's your comment. And he talks about that. People have different characters. And so when you're making a decision, many people are happy to work at the microcosm of luck management, or let's say risk management. Luck, risk, different sides of a coin. And so I work out, if I do this project versus that project, is that better for my career? I'm in a job. I'm choosing between projects. I'm choosing between, they're offering me to do something different. Do I take it or do I leave it? And most people can manage a risk decision process. Many people can manage a risk decision profile which has a certain amount of impact, but won't take themselves. Think of it like stock portfolios. If I take my stock and I go from, I'll use US terms, S&P 500 to Dow Jones 100. I mean, these got different risk profiles, but they're roughly the same. Or maybe I'll go to Apple, or maybe I'll go a little bit crazy and go into Google. Fine. But then people like me turn up and say, well, stuff that, I'm going to put my money in Tesla, which I didn't, and I should have. So I'm very bad at stock. So definitely don't listen to get stock. I lose money. I lose money on two things every single time: buying houses and investing in stock. I always lose money. Everything's lead. So it's all to do with a character on perception of risk and ability to take risk bets. People make decisions doesn't mean that the decision is right or wrong. It's their subjective view on what they're willing to accept in terms of failure. If failure occurs, can I live with it? Am I okay? Mentally, emotionally, am I okay? Not financially. They're not making a financial decision. People don't make financial decisions. In fact, if in sales process, they talk about, you have Salesforce, you have the process, the buying, the qualification line. But a good sales guy talks about the buyer's journey. And a buyer's journey is an emotional journey. Are they aware of it? Do they accept it? Are they willing to toy with it? And here you are, people are going on a buying journey when they're switching careers. And what kind of change are they willing to, what kind of capacity do they have to make big changes? And that'll be different across the different types of people. That's really important to understand that, N of one sort of thing. So for me, your last point of your question was, is it all luck? Well, it's never all luck, but it wasn't a major analysis. The information is often made on, let's put it another way, biotechs. When a VC invests in a biotech, you think, they've done lots of due diligence. They've looked at the data. They've analyzed the data to death. They brought in key opinion leaders. They understand. They have no clue what they're doing. It's just like finger in the air. the other guy seems to think it's good enough, so maybe we should go with it as well. It seems to be the right data. And that's how decisions are often or mostly made. So in this situation, that's what you're going to do. You're going to go with your instinct, but you're going to go with your instinct based on headlines, big topic decision points.
The next question I've got is, it's more of an engineering question, actually. The semiconductor industry. Now, I wrote an article, a Forbes article a while ago, a couple of years ago, a few years ago now maybe, about a company called Butterfly. They were creating a brand new ultrasound, which was handheld. It could be bedside use of ultrasound. And the big innovation was that they were changing from piezoelectric crystal technology to and creating voltage that way to semiconductors. And this had loads of benefits. Can't remember them off the top of my head, but it had loads of benefits. Probably allowed it to be smaller, probably allowed it to be handheld. The quality, it was something about quality increasing, price decreasing, everything that you'd want from moving machinery forwards. And it was like, hold on a minute, what's the downside? And that's actually resolution of the image isn't quite there yet, but it's going to be, or that was the downside, but it had all these other benefits. Now, I'm interested in your view on this. And talk to me as a beginner here. As a beginner, I'm not an engineer. I'm not an electrical engineer. I don't understand that stuff to that degree, and I'm sure a lot of listeners will be in the same boat. What are semiconductors? What's the technology? Why are they good? Why can they help healthcare?
No, happy to discuss. So, as a primer, a semiconductor chip is a piece of silicon. The literal silicon is, silicon's an element. Piece of silicon which is being dug up, refined, cut into little blocks, tiny little blocks, and has had some very expensive machines doing some adding on top of it, creating little metal layers, creating little different types of deposits which allow currents to flow. So It becomes a great place where you can push electricity back and forth. In fact, electricity is not the right word. Electrons is probably the right word. And you can move things around fairly seamlessly, fairly rapidly, at scale. And even you can make things sit there for a little while. That's what storage is, right? DRAM and the whole thing. And now if you take that concept and you say, well, what's that good for? A lot of processing, if you take computers or the big pushes into, we've got this generative AI and all that, so all the processing worlds, I've got to process a lot of information. That means I've got to move a lot of information around. Well, that information can be caught in electrons. That's great. I can store it. I can move it around. I can do calculations. And then you've got things like endpoint devices, solar panels, or the example you gave, where really what I'm doing is that I'm trying to create a sensor of sorts. And that sensor is, again, a material, but the material's got to capture a signal. Well, if I can turn that signal, if I can make that signal electrons, then I'm back to taking advantage of all the compactness and reduction and large-scale manufacturing that semiconductors offers me. So it really has a way of fitting into many different places in life, not just software and processing and all the stuff we hear about, big computers, data centers, but also edge devices where I've got sensors and I'm trying to understand something. And then once I understand it, that's the easy bit. Now I want to take advantage of that information very fast. And think about it, right? They talk about an Apple iPhone having more power, to X times more power than the Apollo 14 or 12 or whatever it was. These things are very real, and they're very stable, and they're very tested, validated, scalable. And because they're getting smaller and smaller, they're using less power. And because they're getting smaller and smaller, they're smaller. And because they've got big manufacturing plants building billions of these things, their fairly unit costs are very low. You're just riding a wave there. Why create another way of manufacturing?
Let's move on to Hitchhiker. Thank you for that explanation, by the way, because I've actually read quite a lot in researching that article. Actually, I was reading quite a lot about the semiconductor industry and the entrepreneurs that are in the semiconductor industry. I was looking these people up. They're all like shaking hands with US presidents and all these things. They're in charge of these companies worth billions. And I was like, wow, like everything in the semiconductor industry seems to be like turning to gold here over the period that I was looking at it anyway. But yeah, to understand that more is incredibly helpful.
James, there's a point there, though. When we read about these topics, whether it's about generative AI or semiconductors or EV cars or whatever it is, we're hearing about the peak of the problem. We're not hearing about we're hearing about for an iceberg, we're hearing about the stuff which is all the cool stuff. We're not hearing about the main tail of activities going on. So semiconductors, sure, there are some issues with energy stability. I've forgotten what they call that. Energy stability, power processing, information, security, things like this. They have all these issues, and semiconductor industries need it. If you go to America, they want TSMC in America. If you go to India, they want to build it in India. Everybody wants to do their thing and talk about their government policies. But if you take all that cool stuff off the table, you still got 80% of that same industry operating. In fact, that the cars don't use that fancy technology. The cars use older technology. 2 years ago, when cars went south, I don't know if you remember, after COVID, they had issues supplying semiconductor chips to cars. It was a big thing, supply chain issues. It wasn't of that fast stuff which was the issue. It was the older stuff which was the issue. So one needs to, if one's solving problems, one needs to not get caught up in the cool stuff. Because if you get caught up in the cool stuff, go do the cool stuff. That's cool. But you're not actually solving a problem. You're just being a techie. Go be a techie then. But if you want to be an entrepreneur, the industry is a supply chain, it's an ecosystem, it has issues, there are bottlenecks, there are, what I talk about, pipes which are clogged up between entities. And go solve those problems, because those problems you're not going to read about in the news.
It's really interesting that. It's an interesting definition of entrepreneurship, or quirk of entrepreneurship as well, that when things get really difficult, and I don't mean a problem that just requires more time to solve, I mean a problem that has really enhanced complexity. Whenever those problems are found, when an entrepreneur gets through them, generally those entrepreneurs are delighted because they know that the next person coming along has got those same problems to solve, or that entrepreneur is the person that's built the road through that complexity and is now charging people per time through that stuff, which is really interesting. A really stupid example, I was just looking around my room here, right? This camera that is pointing at me now, even just thinking, like, how am I going to get 1080p high quality footage from a DSLR onto a podcast so I can get it onto YouTube? You have to buy the camera, you have to buy the right lens, you have to then buy this weird cable, which doesn't plug straight into the computer. You then need to get a weird connector that then does something to the signal to make it computer friendly. Then to get this microphone, you're not just going to get a microphone and plug it in. You've actually got to plug this into a controller. The controller's got to be plugged in. There's then got to be some software that you download. And then you've got to calibrate the whole thing. Then you've got to play with the lighting. Then you've got to play with this. But once you get it all right, now there's a moat between me and most other people that are on podcasts, right? And I'm sort of delighted that it's that difficult. Now I could package this entire thing up and sell it on Etsy or eBay or whatever, and with clear instruction go, here's my podcast package, and I could set myself up that way. Or I could just here delighted that everyone else has got to get through it. Either way. But it's the same about setting up SomX, but this is even more true of the health tech companies and the biotech companies that are trying to plug their way through difficult problems. And I think that's the thing, is that when it gets hard, when it gets messy, when it gets difficult, when it's one of those really wicked problems that involves dealing with people as much as it does with technology, as much as it does with the market and customers, and trying to make your way through a solution of all of that soup, all of that mess, all of that nonsense, like there is such a relief of making any progress there, because you can feel delighted that you've managed to solve that problem. And I think it's the point at which a lot of people turn away, isn't it? It's the point at which a lot of people will go, oh, that is literally too complex now. I thought that I could just whack up a drop shipping store and make £1 million a year because someone on TikTok showed me how to do that. Oh, it hasn't quite worked. I'm just going to quit. A lot of people will fail at that point, but I think it's definitely a quirk that I see a lot of health tech and biotech entrepreneurs, that we're fortunate, aren't we, to be I guess, motivated by something that goes beyond just making money. Ultimately, there's morality, there's ethics, there's a deeper reason behind, whether it's a personal experience, a family member's experience, or whatever it is, that we care deeply about actually changing something. And fortunately, I think for us in healthcare and health tech and biotech is that those founders will just wake up every morning and run through those brick walls. And it's a pleasure to be part of that. And I think in part as well, it's great for us and me personally, as well as some of our team, I think, to watch some of those entrepreneurs that we work for, because at SomX, we work for those people as, you know, they're clients of ours, and we have to do that work. And we see the passion and the drive, and it's not just about money, it's about something deeper. And I love that. And I think that is what allows us to get through so many of these complex problems, is like, man, we're just fortunate not to be like, I guess, just, you know, making the rich richer, or all of those things that are associated with other industries. And not to knock people, by the way, but if you get fulfilled by that, great and good for you, because I think we're all here to do something slightly different, and completely fair play. But yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? So on that note, that's a nice segue into Hitchhikers, because this is somewhat of a passion project for you, with a baking business model in the background, but based on values and core values to you about how you want to see the world. So you're going to have to run through a lot of brick walls in order to make this work. So yeah, talk to me about the problem that you're trying to solve with this, why Hitchhikers might be the solution, and I guess, yeah, just chat through some of your experience in, I guess, this part of your career, because yeah, venturing out, you don't have the big corporate behind you anymore, and yeah, you're doing something new even for you. So yeah, talk me through this bit.
Yeah, you said I'm doing something new even for me. I'll say I'm doing something weird even for me. So supply chain is the problem. This last 5-10 minutes we've discussed actually supply chain being innovation in supply chain, and that's well talked about. I don't have an MBA. I've never been to business school, but if you go to business school, they'll talk about innovation in supply chain being a big deal. What's Tesla? What's EV? What's the Tesla car? It's a supply chain solution. They've worked out how to stack it so they can get everything going, and then of course they led with software. So here in Hitchhikers, we're looking at early drug discovery, and as I said, with my Incubate Bio work and the work at IBM and Eagle Genomics, I noticed a pattern that there was the main thing which is holding back a mass step up in innovation in early drug discovery, which it would be propagated by the use of AI and data, is a supply chain problem. And it's because you've got a few, maybe 100, 200 companies who are always talking about AI and this is early drug discovery. So this is not your animals testing stuff. This is your playing with in vitro test tubes and drugs, understanding what drugs work, understanding how the biology is operating. And companies are speculating about where they want to go. They've got people who are maybe ex-academics, or most of them are ex-academics, so they're very deep in it. And you have a supply chain issue. And in fact, the comparison I give when I present on this is the analogy to the semiconductors industry, which 20 years ago had a design enablement problem. You had very complex chips, and who's all different types of techniques needed for these complexities in these big chips, which are getting more complex by the minute. And a new industry evolved called the electronic design automation industry, EDA industry. So, and that's where I started in the West Coast, but that's also where I did the standards work. So I've seen this parallel in how semiconductors industry has gone after what is an analogous set of problems, multidisciplinary problems, supply chain problems, worked it all out, segregated, created the niche pieces, jigsaw pieces in the supply chain, allowed them to work very well together and go after very complex chips. And that's a given. You live in the semiconductors industry, it's accepted, but it's not accepted here. Over here, if you're a vendor into the life sciences industry, that's a bad word. You're sort of welcome. You're not sort of welcome. Yeah, I'm sure you do something good. We probably do it ourselves, or I'm sure you do something good, but I'm a small company. I can't pay for it. So I realized that this is because if you take it as a supply chain problem, you've got points in a supply chain which have connectors. Just think of it like that. And I call these connectors pipes, like plumbing pipes. And these pipes are blocked. where a data scientist should be helping a wet lab person, it ain't happening today. You think, oh, it is happening. Well, actually, you look carefully, it's not happening. It's not happening as much as you think. 20% happening, 8% is not happening. And where data can be more extensively used, public data or previous data, it's not happening. People don't know. And the reason is because the consumer, the user, the wet lab person, scientist, biologist, or chemist, is basically looking at these topics, reading about them in the news, saying, this is cool, we should do something, but I don't get it really. And I'm not really sure it works for me. I'll let the other guy do it first. And the problem with letting the other guy do it first is by the time the other guy gets it right, you're 5 years behind and your company's going to fail. And not only that, but in 2023, this whole industry went through a massive drought period in funding. And a lot of biotechs are failing, or it's acceleration of failing. And many of them have good data. Their job is to get wet lab data so they can raise. They've got the data. They can't raise. So that will probably soften out in the next year or so, but the pain is felt. So let's learn from it. So you've got this ecosystem where you've got different types of characters, personas, and you've got pipes between which we can unplug, which are fundamentally about use of data much more, use of algorithms much more. And the wet lab scientists, getting them to be excited about that, which is difficult because these are wet lab people. These people will play with test tubes. I mean, they'll use a computer because they have to, but they certainly won't write any code or use code. So you've got some cultural issues there. So I went after this and I thought, look, this is really exciting for me. It's very niche, by the way. It's a very niche problem when you get there. It's not your big, broad problem like I'm going to solve cancer or this or that. But it's a problem which is unattacked, unaddressed. And those are the problems that I mentioned earlier, greenfield. Go after the greenfield stuff. Because the greenfield stuff will be, you have so much opportunity to make a difference so quickly. So we started, thank you to there's a group in the UK called ELRIG, E-L-R-I-G. They're a non-profit kind of industry body, grassroots body, who is free to attend their events, by the way, in early drug discovery. And I know the CEO, Sanj, very well, and he's a great friend. He invited me to their big convention last October in Liverpool. I presented a sidebar there. That kicked it off. So last October, I'm kicking off. I'm socializing some messages which I just made up the day before. And then I'm soliciting people. I'm just walking around soliciting people. And then I got, after the meeting, I continue to solicit people. And then met the SALS people, who are the US version of ELRIG. Bigger, of course, US bigger. And they're wonderful people. They invited me in February. I went to their big annual convention in Boston. And I, again, had another sidebar there, which I presented. And I'm soliciting people in. And over this period, a website comes live. Everyone, please go there, hitchhikersai.org. Hitchhikers AI is one word. And then people start signing up. They're not signing up for anything. Nobody's signing a piece of paper. You have to have certain rules of engagement. You have to understand the culture. Culture matters. In fact, I'm reading a book here, A New Way to Think, by a Toronto academic. And it's all about value, chase value. And it's fascinating. If you're chasing value and you're not biasing that with another agenda, and that value is actually good for people, I mean, there is some genuine thing going on here. People love that. People breathe in that environment, so they'll sign up. So grassroots matters. Doing things that people want to do matter. Moving, being nimble, listening to your community. In fact, to do this program, I've got the book here. I wondered what my job was in this Hitchhikers thing. Someone said, well, you're a COO, CEO, and it's a non-profit. It's all non-profit. I said, no, I'm not that. So I bought this book to learn about my job. And this book's called The Campaign Manager. And it's about running local elections in the States. And it's 14 years old. It's not this newfangled stuff with social media. But and I learned that what I'm doing is I'm doing a campaign. This is a campaign. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to rally people to the cause. And if people believe in it, they'll come to the cause. So we've got a number of activities, number of people. We've got steering committee, 10 people on the steering committee, which is probably going to go to about 12 or 13. A bit heavy towards the States, about 60-40 States, Europe, UK. But all this came from nothing. And nobody signed any piece of paper. Nobody's being paid anything. And people genuinely are doing it, therefore. Now, don't get me wrong. If you're going to make a difference and make an impact, you need money. You need people to be committed to doing some deliverables. And you need to have confidence that the pieces that your collaborators, your partners, the pieces that are in place to make sure that propagates through, so that the user, in this case the bench scientist, are actually really excited by this and actually will use this. And there's subtleties to that. You're running a business at the end of the day, but you are running a business based on people, and that's what grassroots means. And it's the most exciting thing I've ever done.
That's awesome. So looking at your website, Hitchhikers AI, a non-profit impact community accelerating the adoption of AI and machine learning in early drug discovery globally, talks about open source enablement that comes with a community. So you want to level the AI playing field, enable big drug discoveries. So a very noble cause, and clearly, as you say, 150 odd bench scientists, data scientists, mathematicians, entrepreneurs, academics, etc., etc., etc. And the problem you're very clear on: the pipes are blocked. The pipes are blocked to essentially the adoption of AI and machine learning in biotechs,
and data alongside that, James, and data alongside that.
And therefore the understandings, the learnings, and the advancements, yes, because the pipes for the data are blocked. So what's the hope here? So these 150 people in the community, is it a case of you're trying to put together the people that believe this can be different, and you're hoping that people in the community will find solutions? Or is this more a kind of, because you talk about grassroots, that probably is the likelihood, or I guess, are you putting together a community of people to then load them with certain problems to solve in groups? Sort of like what Health does in, I guess, they do it in pharma communities now, but they used to do it in like Healthtech communities and things, that they've put a community of people together in a similar way. I think that's just been acquired actually by someone or something. But yeah, what's the structure of how do you then fire these people at, or indeed harness these people and their desires for change? Like, how does the community do that and support those people?
So do you know much, James, about something called platform economy? You must have come across it in your life. Platform businesses?
I'll be honest, I do not.
Okay, so well, you'll know about it because Airbnb, Uber, Facebook.
Oh, right, okay, as a concept, makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, as a concept, yeah. So when you're dealing with ecosystem, and I used to do some consulting in platform business, so this is quite lucky as well that I could carry this through. But when you're dealing with an ecosystem and you're trying to have the ecosystem engage well, unblock these pipes, what you really have is a platform economy problem. What you really have is a series of people, stakeholders, who have different views on what they need from it. And you're trying to enable them so that the endpoint, what we call the demand side, in this case, very focused on bench scientists, win. But everybody's got to win. So when your question was about who you're activating, in what format you're activating, and we're just evolving that a little bit now. We're realizing, and this is the steering committee reviewing this literally today. Yesterday I sent out an updates tweak to our positioning. How are you activating? You've got to activate with the most efficiency, lowest risk, and most confidence. So you've got to be cost efficient. You can't say, "Oh, I'm going to raise $5 million a year and then I'm just going to do stuff." That's not cost efficient. You've got to lower the risks. For example, you have to set up an organization. It's a non-profit. It will be non-profit. That's not debatable. But otherwise, you have a different culture if you go for-profit. But you have risks in all these things, working with different characters, different groups, any groups. There's risks in there. You have to have confidence that the thing is going to be used. So you have to understand what these people need, the bench scientists need. You have to put surveys out, which are useful surveys that people, when they respond, will actually be materially helpful to you understanding what to work on. So the approach we're taking somewhat is pick the topic based upon what the user base says. Don't just do stuff. Go out and ask people. And bench scientists are not represented. Go across the, you won't see bench scientists represented. You'll see them participatory in many of these organizations, especially LRIG and SALS, but you won't see them having a voice because people don't think bench science. And then you've also got to, and this is where it's really fundamentally important, you've got to represent the vendor community as well. Because who's going to provide the cool stuff? There are many open source repos out there which are really good, but that's what they are, repos. And if I stick a whole bunch of code and I've got 20,000, packets of different applications sitting on open source code, it's over there. It's like a graveyard. I'm not saying it is a graveyard, but it's like a graveyard. It stays within that community. We're not trying to get in that community. We're trying to help the bench scientist out. And the bench scientist doesn't care about any of this. Bench scientist says, look, I'm willing to play if you can remove the fog and give me something I can use, I can get, and I can understand.
Yeah.
Right? So you have to activate the vendor side of things as well. And this efficiency on what you're trying to achieve across the sides of a platform, it really matters. If you don't, and they call this platform management. And if you don't do it properly, all you're doing is you're in an echo chamber feeding cool words like source code or generative AI, or all you're doing is feeding what your banks are talking to a VC and using the words VCs expect. So there's a subtlety to getting this right to create the activation to unplug those pipes.
Yeah, okay. So my understanding of this then is that you can argue that we're talking about the tech bio space here, a term that's used to kind of describe the digitization of a lot of those processes and the capture of data and all the rest of it. And plenty of tech bio companies exist trying to do that. But I guess and feel free to disagree with that, but the premise here is that everything exists. Those tech bio companies exist. The bench scientists are trying to do their thing, other vendors, VC, all this stuff exists. I guess what you're talking about is the connective tissue in the middle isn't fit for purpose. And actually what you're trying to do is unite all the people that exist in all of those communities that have a certain value system, i.e., they see the world becoming a better place. They want to do it with values that are shared with you. They're happy to work together on things. You're talking about people coming from lots of different parts of this ecosystem on your platform to then try and solve a problem. And I think the interesting thing there for me is that, I guess for the tech bio companies that might be listening, like, they have a stake in being friends with you here, because actually what you're doing is accelerating their adoption in some places for the benefit of whoever is the customer on that side of the table, but actually then everyone and everything downstream of that. I don't know if you've got a thought on that.
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, just to clarify, when I use the term platform and platform business, I'm not talking about an IT platform. It's a business model. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm not talking about I have a piece of software which people can log into. No. On your question, we want everything to become tech bio with the current state that 80% are not.
Yeah, so you don't care whether it's the startups that are driving it, whether it's the incumbents changing their own systems. You just want the whole thing moving in that direction.
There is a presumption we're making, an assumption that the industry will continue to be validated, companies will continue to be validated based upon their wet lab data. If you take that assumption, you're trying to help them get to that data as fast as possible. Maybe you can make wet lab hybrid and use a whole bunch of non-wet lab data to support their package to move faster. But you're trying to help a bench scientist out. Everything starts and stops with that bench scientist in this business.
Yeah, okay.
So it doesn't matter what company they sit in, you're trying to help them. In 80% of the companies, they don't have much enablement with computers. Right. They don't. You think they do, but they don't. Because we always hear tech bio, there's a tech bio event here, there's a tech bio event there. UK is broadcast with tech bio everywhere. If you go to these places which host incubate labs, and you talk to all these different labs, 80% of them, they're not tech bios. They're just normal people who used to be a postdoc or used to be a professor or used to work at a big company, and they're just doing lab work. That's what they do, lab work.
Right. What do you think then is the lowest hanging fruit here? What's going to be the, I don't know, top 3 project, or where do you see is the best place for this community to focus on initially, or best places, or that kind of thing?
Two areas are very exciting to me. And again, we have to validate this because, as I say, these things need to be funded. So if you pick a project, it has to be a real problem and there has to be a real funder so we can get the project done and everything can pull out, bring in the vendors to the system. And when we bring the vendors to a system, we bring them through at cost. So nobody's making any money in our operations. Non-profit doesn't mean we're non-profit, it means the whole thing's non-profit. But the vendors get their stuff shown off so that they can go and make cross sales, other sales to other people and stuff. But the one is the use of real world data. Real world data is a really big thing, and it's not brought back at mass. I mean, some companies are really good at it. They talk about real world data this, real world data that. I'm talking about these early tech bios, these biotechs. But actually, not many companies use real world data. Again, that's 80-20 thing. Maybe 95% don't really use real world data. Think of things like phenotypic screening for targets, for drugs, those early decisions in early drug discovery. They're not using real world data. If we can, I don't know if you've read about crossing the chasm before, but if we can help them go from early adopters to mainstream, I think that'd be fantastic. A big thing. And there are large foundations like the Bill Gates Foundation and Zuckerberg Foundation. Large foundations got, there's different foundations UK, like Parkinson's UK, in Alzheimer's. They've got data sets because they've got patients and people and the communities, and they've got lots of data coming in. And what's the data doing? Sitting there. And these foundations would love to see their data used in getting better drugs. I mean, wouldn't we? But again, we're not going to get the better drugs. We just want to unclog the pipes so that the biotechs become tech bios to use that data. That's one. The other one is this, and again, I think data along the data theme as well. Well, actually, I'll give you a third one. Along the data theme on the second one, is you've got like groups like Sanger and DepMap and these Broad and EBI. You've got these groups with these databases sitting around, and they're actually enablement stacks. I wouldn't call them database, enablement stacks. They've got data, and then they've got tools on top of the data, and these are really good. But can we get those exposed to your bench scientist? See, things tend to be designed for data scientists. So if I'm a coder, if I know how to do knowledge graphs and some fancy way of absorbing and creating some fancy databases, these are perfect databases for me. But if I'm a bog standard person who doesn't really understand all this confusing data sets and all this and that, and I don't really look inside Excel files much, this is a bit overwhelming for me. So there's probably a working layer on top of that. And that's my third area, which is specifically within that second point, the use of natural language layers to go on top of these systems to help people in a simple English way interrogate and discover what's going on in those databases. Remember, we're a non-profit. We don't want to make any money. But if we can put those layers there, then all that hard work that these massive institutions are already doing, we could just make it accessible. But it's not their core skill, because these are PhDs and they're scientists and they're data scientists. So you've got the thing to remember is that in AI, in ML, there's not an AI ML. It's like saying I drive a car. I mean, what does that mean? What car do you drive? How many wheels has it got? Does it have an engine? So if you've got someone who does AI, it's very multidisciplinary now. And you need those multiple disciplines. They've got loads of those disciplines, but they don't have some of the newer disciplines on board. So some of the generative AI stuff. So we can bring some of that. And again, when I say we, I mean the community, the individuals in the community, who, by the way, are vendors. Many of them are vendors who would love the opportunity to make a difference and get cost recovery on the way.
Yeah. It seems when you're talking about this, it's fascinating, because I think in some small way, it's sort of similar to, I guess, what we try and do with a lot of our content. Like, there's no for a lot of the content that we put out, like, we go quite hard. There's quite a lot of content we put out. We don't need to put out as much content as we do. But what is satisfying, and I guess I'm talking about, like, if you boiled it right down to like business need or whatever. You'd probably be a bit more strategic about guests and probably wouldn't do as many podcasts or whatever. But there's something satisfying about when we put events together or look in the comments of certain posts or whatever. It's satisfying to see that by democratizing certain information, people from all around the community of all different disciplines learn something. Yeah. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that just because we put a podcast clip out, the world changes at any great scale. But in some small way, it might. And that might not be from the content, but it might be from the event that we put together, that people see that certain people that they see often in the podcast, in the comments are going, and therefore they decide to go, they meet them and have a chat, and something blossoms and da-da-da. Now, when you put that at the individual level, it doesn't really make sense. But when you then play that out at scale, and, we probably get like, 1 million impressions across all the different bits and bobs, like over the course of a year. And so, like, a few of those impressions lead to something. There's something like satisfying about seeing this. Like, every single day, there's something that goes out from one of our channels that various people are liking and commenting on the rest of it. And I think that's sort of what you're talking about there, which is like, there's this element of just getting information to lots of people that these different disciplines in AI and ML exist, the capability of those different disciplines that they might not be using. And actually, when you put the human being next to the other human being in your community in some way, you're facilitating a conversation, which is the transfer of information, which can then lead to something very practical and tangible. And I think as seemingly you and I are human beings with similar values, that we do see we both achieve satisfaction when we see community happen against a certain cause that we believe in. Now, we do it slightly differently to what you're doing, but we're talking roughly about a similar thing, which is that if you essentially centralize all of the people that care about something, which in our case is health tech and biotech, for you, it's more specific down exactly what you talk about in Hitchhikers, which is AI and ML and tech bio, and the spread of information across those different disciplines. But when you put those individuals in the same place, it is deeply satisfying to you and I to watch things then happen. Yep. I think there's then, and that's the personal satisfaction bit, there's then the kind of like, well, there's broad impact here for the world, and actually who knows what happens when all of these things and the stars actually really do align, and actually a big project does emerge that solves an actual problem. Well, that's incredible. And that's, I guess, the justification and where some of that satisfaction comes from, which is knowing that the time put into this is not time wasted, because even at the smallest level, two people that have had a great conversation is satisfying to them, therefore is satisfying to me. And I guess what I've become better at recently, and I guess, seeing your journey through this, there's going to be tough points and things like that. I guess what I've become better at is just letting myself feel satisfied, letting myself feel good about the fact that a couple of people just had a good conversation, and therefore it was a successful event, or it was a successful. That's unplugging. Yeah, right. Yeah, you're right.
You're right. And it's not just you put them in the same room. I don't think you give yourself full credit. It's not that it's the same. It's not the centralization only. That's the functional part. But you created the right tone of language and the right relationship between them. So if they're vendor-buyer, that's the wrong relationship. If the language is like this, they're missing each other at night, then nothing happens. So you've created a close language, and you've created a peer-to-peer relationship in that environment, that centralized environment.
How are you thinking about that? So you clearly have some, experience and almost academic knowledge about this. So do you think about that deliberately in how you're communicating and using language, and in the way that you're setting up Hitchhikers? What are you doing deliberately along those lines, I guess, is the question.
I think being very careful, because I have a little bit of history in platform economy and understanding that if you mismanage them, they go wrong. But I'm investing in people. Number one, investing in people, and then creating autonomy in those people. So even though this is a non-profit, people they come, they're smart, they're decent people, and then I believe that when they interact without me in the room, the right things are happening.
Yeah,
and they want to learn from each other. So I'm investing in people. I'm being quite careful with messaging. That I've got some control over. I have, as I say, a strong steering committee, and I'm making sure that I'm listening to my steering committee, even though no one's paid, no one's signing a piece of paper.
Yeah.
I'm very privileged to have these as a global team.
Yeah.
I'm very privileged that these people will want to comment and do care, and I want to listen to them. So learning to listen is a big thing for me. That I have to listen. Learning to invest in people in a non-profit environment. Invest doesn't mean money. It means putting them on a pedestal and allowing them, and then allowing things to be one or two separations from me in the non-profit. These sort of things. Otherwise, what happens is, even if you're spot on target, nobody's really energized. Nobody really feels they have a place. Back to that campaign manager role. If somebody's out putting yard signs there and they're not enjoying themselves, they might be putting yard signs in exactly the right place, but they won't come back tomorrow. And so energizing a community, this has been a big learning for me, James, how to energize a community and keep that energy there. But they're very busy and they're trying to pay their bills.
Yeah, and that is the responsibility of people that put these things together. We feel that responsibility. Oh God, it hangs over me like a cloud. Honestly, the every time I'm on a stage, for an event, I've got this like internal alarm that starts going off of like, this is getting boring. This is getting boring. This needs to get up in energy, or like up in quality of content or something. And I think though, like the level at which the alarm goes off for me is slightly before I think most people's. Therefore, like, I'll probably catch it just at the right time to then like scramble and try and change something. But yeah, I totally agree. Like, and you're talking about a different sort of scale to just being on stage, but yeah, I totally agree. It's keeping up the energy, because there's two types of energy, isn't there? There's the activation energy to actually spark something, and then there's just that ongoing energy that's required to maintain it. And I think where you're talking about a community that's trying to solve very difficult problems, you're going to need lots of both, because there's going to be multiple activation energies required to spark lots of different things in order to eventually end up at a solution. And of course, the maintenance through the difficult parts. It's an interesting challenge, and it is a challenge. But it is also interesting and inherently rewarding if you clearly are someone that values community and watching people interact in a positive way and all those things. It sounds awesome, man. And like, it's been a pleasure, mate. What a journey. Like, what a journey from VC to PhD science, semiconductors, a very, very varied career that you've had, to entrepreneurship, and now what you're doing with Hitchhikers. It's a wonderful journey. And I mean it when I say that. I wish you all the best with it. And as I say, look forward to really being involved. For people that want to learn more about Hitchhikers, I know you mentioned the website earlier, but for people that do want to learn more, what's the best way for them to do so?
So I'm always open to people reaching out and saying hello. So go look at the website, but don't feel you need to. It's not a formal process. You just ping me on LinkedIn, find me, talk to me. We'll get on a 15, 30-minute call. Yeah, I'm here to help. I genuinely, my phase of my life, that if just people want to talk, I'm here to help.
Beautiful. Raminderpal, thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks, James. It's really lovely. Thank you.